The following content is meant purely for educational and informational purposes and should not be relied upon as financial, investment, legal, tax, or any other professional advice. This is the Fundamentals Podcast, where we demystify crypto and help you navigate this ever-evolving internet-native economy. In this episode, we're joined by Steven Goldfeder, the co-founder and CEO of Offchain Labs, the team behind Arbitrum. We discussed the launch of Arbitrum Stylus, which significantly broadens the blockchain developer ecosystem by making it possible to write smart contracts in programming languages that compile to WASM, such as Rust, C, C++, and many more. We speak about Arbitrum's strategic positioning in the constantly expanding blockchain market, highlighting its value proposition against alternative ecosystems and tech stacks. We cover the most exciting developments within the Orbit ecosystem, the concept and significance of chain clusters, and the most exciting chains being developed today. We also break down Arbitrum's business model and how institutions like Franklin Templeton and Robinhood are integrating with the onchain ecosystem. Our discussion closes with Steven's vision on Arbitrum's success as a leader in various verticals from DeFi to gaming to institutional finance, all powered by Arbitrum Nitro. Tune in for a great discussion on the fundamentals of Arbitrum. Steven, welcome to the Fundamentals Podcast. It is great to have you on.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Last week was a big one for you guys. You tweeted that blockchain development will have its broadband moment this week. Arbitrum Stylus was released, so that happened. Could you maybe start from there and give us some insight into how you see this impacting the developer ecosystem going forward?
Yeah, I think that's it. Not to repeat the line again, but I think it really is the broadband moment of blockchain. If you think about it, we like to say that in order to get the next billion users, which is the meme that everyone wants, we need to onboard the next million developers. But it turns out that a little bit over a week ago, there weren't a million developers who could develop on Arbitrum chains. There were maybe a few tens of thousands because that's how many Solidity developers there are in the world. But now, via Stylus, there are literally about 15 million plus developers that can use their existing skills and develop an app on the Arbitrum chain because Stylus added WASM support. And with WASM, we got Rust and C and C++. And by the way, there's now a path to add many, many more languages as well, anything that compiles to WASM. But if you take a step back, I think that Stylus has what I'm excited about, three different components to it. The number one is what we just said, it's the developers, it's the people. The fact is that there are so many more developers now that can develop an Arbitrum that could a week ago. And it's not just, our Arbitrum, it's Ethereum. Ethereum now is open up to so many more different developers that literally was a week ago. And we actually have a path now to engage with so many different developer communities and enterprises that may not have blockchain teams or may not have Solidity or EVM expertise, but they do have Rust or C or C++. So number one is the people. Number two is actually not the people, but it's the code, right? So even if, a really good developer can retrain, no one's stopping a good developer from saying, okay, I'm a great C++ developer. They're not going to say, oh, I can't develop on Ethereum because I don't know the language. What they're going to do is they'll say, okay, I'll spend a weekend or two, I'll learn Solidity and I'll be able to do that. They'll get good audits, etc. But what they won't be able to do is take all the code that they've written in their career or the code that others have written, the open source libraries that exist in Rust and C and C++. And two great examples of this are number one, cryptography, and number two, AI. So AI is another great example of something that just doesn't exist today. I'll take cryptography. I'm a cryptographer by trade, so it's a little biased towards that. But take cryptography and today, if you want to launch a cryptographic protocol on chain, you have a few options. Number one, if there's a precompile that supports you, that's great. If you want to launch in a particular curve that's supported by a precompile, that's wonderful. But if you don't, you want to do something that's a little bit more exotic, it doesn't have, precompile support on chain. So number one is you can either go and say, hey, how do I, get a precompile, go on this years-long process. Maybe you'll get a precompile added. Probably not, actually. Probably you'll just, will fail in that process, but maybe. But in the best case, it will take you a really long time. Number two is you can actually say, hey, let me actually try to forget about the precompile. Let me try to write this code in Solidity. But the problem is today is two things. Number one, the code doesn't exist in Solidity. No one's written, advanced cryptographic protocols in Solidity. And number two is even if it did exist, and it's a sort of a cyclical problem, the reason why it doesn't exist is it wouldn't be able to run. Wouldn't be performant enough. You wouldn't be able to run it on chain even if you actually did write the code, the functions that you want. And Stylus actually solves both of these. So number one, it was the people. Number two is the code. You don't need to rewrite Solidity. If there's a Rust library or a C library that does what you want, you can just now bring that on chain directly. That's already a library that's used, in the internet, used in maybe web browsers, used in other protocols. You can just bring it on. It's a long, trusted, audited library. You can bring it on. Don't need to rewrite it. And number three, Stylus is a scaling solution at heart. So Offchain Labs is really known for its scaling solution, and Stylus is that as well. Stylus gives you about a 10x performance improvement in computation. So computation that you do with EVM stuff, take it over to Stylus, you'll get about a 10x cost advantage of doing that. And now you just hit those last two nails on the head, right? Remember, the problem was the cryptographic code didn't exist. And even if it did exist, you wouldn't be able to run it. Okay, great. Now with Stylus, we can pull in the existing code and boom, it actually works as well because we get this 10x performance. So number one is the people. There are now so many more developers that can develop. Number two is the code that they've written, the corpuses of code that exist, in Rust and C and C++ that don't exist in Solidity. Number three is the scaling solution, the fact that you now have more capacity and more bandwidth on the chain to actually run more apps and run more complicated code without increasing the resources on the node, right? So for the same computational cost of running these nodes, you can do a whole lot more. So I think Stylus is a massive moment, and it's both for new applications, right? So just last week as well, Renegade Finance went live. This is an on-chain dark pool. So you can now trade with guaranteed pricing, privacy, no front running, massive increase that wasn't possible before. And they're doing a ton of zero knowledge proofs on chain. So they're using this cryptography angle where they need Stylus to get efficient cryptographic verification and cryptographic performance. But it's also just for other apps that even if you're doing something on chain today that it can work, it does work. Can you do it better? Can it become a lot more cheaper? Can you enable, usage levels or value levels that aren't possible today because the fees go down? So now a new class of users and a new class of trades for a lower value is made possible. So it's really both of these. So I'm excited about, I would say, both of those things.
That's just incredible. And a big congrats to the whole team on getting that out. Can't wait to see how that affects just the whole Ethereum ecosystem now, because that's like a massive developer or technical bottleneck that has been solved now. And what comes to my mind as the logical next question is that, what are the immediate next steps on your side? Now that this is out, it's live, that bottleneck is removed. Is it more developer education, getting the word out that now it's possible to come build in this space without a specific niche developer knowledge, or something else?
Yeah, so it's a few things. Number one is, getting the word out and really getting developers to experiment with it. And we're lucky that there is no shortage of developers that are already building on it. Like I said, we had day one launches that went live, and there were several of them. Today, the launches are mostly on the form of things that are net new, things you couldn't do before. Teams that have been building for months on this technology that literally the EVM couldn't serve them. But there's also a lot of tooling and infrastructure support as well. So one of the nice things about the way Stylus was designed is it's very, very compatible with Ethereum infrastructure and tooling. In fact, if you have an EVM smart contract today and you want to upgrade it to Stylus, you can do that because the storage format's the same. It talks the same language. The ABI is the same. So you can take your existing application in Solidity and upgrade it to Stylus. In fact, you could even mix and match. Say that you have an application today in Solidity that's working really well, but maybe there's one component that's slow and on ELD and would benefit from rewriting in Rust. You can do that too because these two technologies interact so well. So that's the second thing, which is basically really just getting the word out and also getting the infrastructure support for it as well, right? So Offchain Labs, we did a big lift by creating the core Stylus software, but then there's a whole bunch of other teams that need to integrate Stylus into their work streams as well. So a great example is also went live last week together with the launch was Etherscan contract verification. So now you can do Stylus and Rust contract verification on Etherscan. We've architected the technology to make integration of this easy, but it also requires a lift from, say, the Etherscan team to go ahead and add those hooks and do that. So working in teams like that. Another great example is Open Zeppelin, created they have their very popular libraries for EVM Solidity. They created some Stylus libraries to do some popular contract types and applications. And those are two examples of ones that are already exist or are in motion. But there's a whole lot of other things as well. Even though the technology was created to make these integrations simple, to actually go ahead and get these integrations live and make it. It's not about one team, but it's about getting the whole community to support this and adopt this. So getting all your favorite tooling to support this, I think, is another really big project for us to work on. And the good news is that teams are very excited about it. People understand the power of Stylus and how awesome it is and the unlock that it is. And we're finding no shortage of teams that are interested, but obviously this takes time.
That makes a ton of sense, and thank you for sharing all of that context around it. Like I said before, looking forward to seeing how everything starts playing out there. Can only imagine that developer counts and energy in that ecosystem is just going to start growing as people realize what is possible.
Absolutely.
Just a while back over at Token Terminal, we launched a new Discover page where we have these like curated dashboards of different ecosystems. And one dashboard that we put together was on the Orbit ecosystem. And funny enough, that happens to be one of the most viewed dashboards right now, one of the most popular ones, getting lots of questions. And saw you interacting with it on Twitter as well, which is one of the reasons why we're sitting here today. So I thought the next we could dive into the Orbit ecosystem and Arbitrum Nitro as well, speak a bit about that. And to set the stage and just understanding a bit of the market dynamics and positioning here, I think for a good place to start could be that with the increase in just the number of L2s and the number of different tech stacks that people can use to build in this space, what is the pitch for builders to build on Arbitrum versus alternatives? So how do you position yourselves in the market, kind of building on what we just discussed with Stylus, of course?
Okay, so first of all, back to the first thing. Yeah, thank you guys for the wonderful work you do. You just showed up on my Twitter feed one day, and I've very informative and impressive work that you guys do. So kudos to that. Please keep it up. Really a great addition to the entire ecosystem. But when it comes to your question of where does Arbitrum sort of stand out and what's its core selling points? So I think it's a few things. Number one is when it comes to Orbit specifically, it's the customizability, also the freedom, right? So the idea that you can take a stack that's, the same stack and customize it as you want, as you will. No one else is telling you, hey, you can't do this. You need to ask for my permission to do this. We're going to govern you. That's the beauty of the Arbitrum Orbit stack, which is you govern yourself and you do what you want with the code. And that includes a lot of what we call pre-built customizations. So you can say, hey, you can, when you launch an Orbit chain, you can choose what the gas token is. Do you want it to be Ethereum? Do you want it to be USDC, right? So you can, or do you want it to be maybe your own token? Like all those are possible. You can choose the gas token. Of course, so the Arbitrum public chains, the gas token is Ethereum. But when you're launching your own application chain, it doesn't have to be. You can basically make that choice and choose what the token is. Also, you can choose what your governance is, right? So no one else is telling you, hey, the Arbitrum DAO is not governing you. It's not telling you what to do and what you can do. And this is actually a big differentiator from other ecosystems. In other ecosystems, you're limited by the governance. You can't go ahead and join their structures and also make changes at will. You have to ask for permission. You don't have to do that in Arbitrum. And the third thing is you can actually go deep into the code and make whatever changes you want. So for example, there's a team called Phoenix, FHENIX, that's building FHE or fully homomorphic encryption on chain to add privacy to the Stylus network. Another team called Kinto is making a KYC institutional environment where institutions can feel comfortable trading in a regulatory compliant environment for their needs. Right. So you can take the same basic stack. There's Ape Chain that's, doing really, an anime chain that are targeting their community's enemies from Azuki. Ape Chain is called, of course, from the Bored Ape Yacht Club, targeting their NFT communities and doing really interesting, innovative things there as well, more on the ecosystem level, as well as on the technology level. And then you have really so much of variety. Gaming is another big ecosystem in Arbitrum. There's Zai and Treasure and Proof of Play's chain that you guys are probably tracking are some of the most performant and high throughput chains that exist. I think chains that exist anywhere, L2s and L3s exist. The Proof of Play, they actually have two chains now. They've outgrown one chain. They have two chains that are seamlessly working together for their game Pirate Nation, which is extremely successful. So the idea is you can take the same basic stack, but because of the freedom that we give you and the lack of restrictions, you can customize it and make something that's wholly new and put together the pieces and actually add new pieces and supplement the pieces in ways that no one else has ever done this before. And that I think is a massive unlock for the Arbitrum ecosystem. Because if you're a developer today, building your application and wanting to build your chain, the last thing you want, you already have enough problems and enough things to deal with. The last thing you want is some other community that's maybe, loosely aligned with you at best, telling you what to do, what you can do, what you can't do. Some other stacks have that limitation. The Arbitrum stack does not have that limitation, which I think is a very, very important differentiator. Number two is some of the core technology. Right? The fact is the Arbitrum 1 is the only, and Arbitrum 1 and Arbitrum Nova, but Arbitrum 1 as a rollup is the only public chain today that has live fraud proofs. The only optimistic roll with live fraud proofs today, even in 2024. So there's a lot of the security argument that exists today. And, different Orbit chains choose their own security models. Many run any trust, they get to choose. But the point is the core technology is there for them to be as secure as they want to be, as secure as the Arbitrum Orbit chains to be. And they have those tools at their fingertips. Fast block times, that's a huge one. Arbitrum has the fastest block times of any network, any blockchain network anywhere, not just an L2 or L3, anywhere. And the public chains run at about 250 milliseconds, but actually some Orbit chains are going even faster. I think Rhea, for example, is running at 100 milliseconds. The Arbitrum technology can support, a really fast 100 milliseconds. That's really fast. That's, basically Web 2 time where you press a button and you get a response in 100 milliseconds. So really, really great user experience, it becomes important. If you're playing a game, the last thing you want is, I do something in my game, press some button, and then a spinner goes up for, 12 seconds, 15 seconds, who knows. You don't want that, right? That's not how we're going to get, mass adoption. That's okay for me and you, because we're like crypto native and we understand what's happening. It doesn't frustrate it. But if you want to expand to the masses, tell your user, hey, come play this great game. It's even better because it has blockchain. They're going to say it's not better. It's like it's slow. And I press a button and now it's like slow. And it's like, what's going on here? So you have to make sure the UX is really good. Arbitrum has best in class UX. The low fees is another really, really important one as well. And then Arbitrum Stylus, which we touched on, I don't want to go deep into it again, but it's no one else has, the ability to seamlessly build Rust and C and C++ together. And this is, again, important as you talk to institutions that have these development teams that have, years of technology they've written in these languages. They can say, hey, you can actually just bring some of that on chain. You can, that C library you love off chain, you can actually use that on chain too. That's extremely, extremely powerful for these communities. And yeah, I think that, those are some of the biggest selling points. And then it's also the access to the Arbitrum community, right? So we've talked a lot about technology, but it's the access to the Arbitrum community as well. The Arbitrum ecosystem is the strongest ecosystem of any L2 ecosystem from a liquidity perspective, from a number of protocols perspective. And it's just a really, really strong community. And, the Arbitrum Orbit ecosystem, it's not just a bunch of different chains. It's an orbit of chains, right? They're all orbiting together, and they all have access to, increasingly so over time, different interop capabilities and tooling that will tie them together and make, interactions with them seamless, and you get access to that as well. So overall, great technology, great ecosystem, but probably the biggest selling point of all is the fact that you can customize it at will, and you don't have to just launch another vanilla chain. You can actually launch something that's completely differentiated. And you know what? You don't have to ask my permission. You don't have to ask the Arbitrum Foundation's permission. You don't have to ask the Arbitrum DAO's permission. Your protocol, your rules, your chain.
Very, very clear list of value propositions there. And especially the fact that, if we think of especially the cohort of the most crypto native developers, and we all have slight ideological twists to us, more of little bits of anarchy, and we're a little bit against hierarchy. So we don't want people telling us what to do. So I can imagine that the freedom aspect there is something that developers really, really appreciate in this space.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you kind of alluded to interop there with Orbit, and I want to double tap on that and dive one level deeper into Orbit, because I've been listening to a lot of your speaking engagement that you've done, trying to, in my own mind, position Arbitrum and Orbit as an ecosystem in the crypto space right now. And one interesting thing that I think you have spoken about is the fact that Arbitrum and Orbit will bring L2s and L3s to Arbitrum without necessarily branding it as a purely like interop solution. And you've spoken about chain clusters instead of just a single unified layer of liquidity, right? So can you speak about this concept of chain clusters in a bit more detail and how it contrasts with the ideas that we hear from maybe other ecosystems?
Yeah, and it actually connects very closely back to this idea of customizability and freedom, because it turns out there is a lot. So what is a chain cluster? A chain cluster is when two or more chains decide that they want to, operate more closely and share liquidity in a way that's faster than, say, the on-chain settlement time. So they have a much more closer dependence, and it's really powerful, right? Because you can do things like build great UX between the two, and then you can send things more quickly and try to build really fast interactions. The problem is, if you're going faster than Ethereum settlement, you have some built-in trust, right? So for example, let's say that there's a hack on chain, say chain A and chain B are part of the same cluster. Something goes wrong on chain A. There's some hack, or there's some bad money there, right? Maybe there's unbacked bridge funds there. Now, if chain A can just throw the bag over to chain B, if you will, right? Because they're part of this super chain cluster. So a break, if you will, in chain A actually poisons chain B as well, right? So you get a lot of good things, but you also get some dependencies and some not such good things if there are bad things. And that's not necessarily a bad thing always, but you just have to understand the risk and the pros and cons. And now that's where you get to customizability. So if you and I are in a chain cluster together, because of the risk I'm taking by associating with you, I want to know what you're doing. I don't want you going off and doing some crazy customizations and doing things that are new and hacky that I don't trust. You can't just do your own thing. We're part of the same cluster here. If something goes wrong on your chain, it affects me too. So I need to know and really vet and audit and trust everything that you're doing. That's the core tension here, right? And that's why in these other communities where they have one of this, super chain clusters, if you will. So a chain cluster that's one for all, they have strict limitations on what you can now do in that cluster. And for good technical reasons, right? It's not artificial. They're not making it up. But I can't let you go say, okay, you guys go and do your crazy custom cryptography thing, enjoy. I have to say, well, I want to take a look at that. I want to look at that code. I can't go even and say something like, hey, you guys, do your own data availability solution. Let me make sure it's one of the, data availability solutions that I trust. Because if I'm posting all my data availability to Ethereum, but I'm subject to your, janky data availability solutions, that going wrong, then what am I doing? I still have the dependency on it, even though I'm not using it myself, right? So there's a lot more that I need to care about, be opinionated about in your chain. And that's where you see these governance structures sort of emerge, where you can't go and innovate if you're part of our, super chain cluster, if you will. You have to now actually ask me for my permission. And you have to give us your permission. And that's, and again, it's not a bad thing per se. It's a different thing. There's good technical reasons for it, but it's also much more limiting to innovation. And what you end up with it's a lot easy. It's pretty simple to get permission to launch a vanilla EVM chain that follows these prescribed rules. But anytime you want to deviate and do something which I'll call interesting, you now have to ask for my permission. And who am I? I'm someone that's, has my own interests. And while I'm happy to be, in this cluster with you, auditing your code, your wacky thing that you think is the best thing in the world, and I think is just kind of wacky, might not be, in my best interest right now, and I just might not have the bandwidth for that. And that's why we fundamentally believe that there's this tension between freedom, if you will, customizability, but ultimately freedom, and everyone joining the same cluster. So what we think makes more sense is for there to be a network of clusters. And chains can sort of self-join clusters if they want. So it could be that all the EVM chains of a particular vertical say, wait, we'll trust ourselves and join the same cluster. You know what another great example of a cluster is? I have a single app and I have too many users, right? Like Proof of Play, has created two chains. So maybe I'll create two chains and make a cluster out of them. So now there's no issue of trusting each other. It's like both me, but by virtue of a cluster, I now have parallelized myself and gotten more capacity and now, have increased our bandwidth and our throughput, right? So there's like very good reasons. And it could go past that as well. It could also be like, hey, we're all the games, we know what we're doing, we trust each other, and we think it's going to be the benefits of being in a cluster are going to outweigh them. But when you get to this idea of the games are in the same cluster as like the DEX chains and the same cluster as, the KYC chains, you just get into this like thing that's like, we don't really care about each other that much. And like our priorities aren't the same. And now I'm taking on all these dependencies for you. And I don't have the bandwidth to review you. And we get to a lot more standardization, right? So, hey, you can launch an EVM chain. Maybe there's a list of, pre-confirmed changes you can make relating to some simple modifications. But ultimately, you're not going to have the freedom to do what you want. And that's why we believe that, hey, we don't push a single cluster. We push freedom. And part of freedom is the ability to join clusters. And by the way, if all these chains want to join together and say, hey, actually, we want a single cluster, they can do that. That's there, but no one's forcing you to do that in order to be part of this, right? It's everyone can sort of self-choose their cluster. And I do imagine that over time, we'll see different vertical clusters emerge because those make sense. I imagine we'll see clusters emerge around similar technology choices, around similar user bases, because they'll make a lot of sense there. And the pros will outweigh the cons. But I think the cons for a single cluster for all outweigh the pros, because what happens in practice is innovation is limited. And by the way, this is not theoretical. There was a chain it was launched by Gitcoin called the Public Goods Network. And they ended up announcing that they're shutting down. And one of the reasons they said is they wanted to do on-chain enforced royalties, but they weren't able to get the governance permission to be able to do that. So and this is not an Arbitrum, this is in a competitor that had a single cluster for all. In Arbitrum, you have plenty of chains that are doing it. Rari Chain by Rarible, for example, is doing exactly this. Is it doing on-chain enforced creator royalty? This innovation is just, table stakes, and it's something you can, anyone can do, as opposed to in other ecosystems, you have to start asking others for permission. And particularly, by the way, for a small player, that might not be the most important or the most interesting or the most exciting chain in the cluster, but to them, it's really exciting what they're doing. And they think they have a path to innovation and they want to take that bet. They're going to be much more limited in one of these single large clusters that limits their innovation, and they'll be much more empowered with Arbitrum. And that's why I think one of the core reasons, which I mentioned before, there are lots of reasons to choose the Arbitrum stack, from the fast block times to the low cost, to Arbitrum Stylus, to the security and fraud proofs that are far beyond what exists in any other ecosystem. But I think the core reason is the customizability and the freedom that you have to innovate exactly as you want, and no one else is making those decisions for you.
I really do like that clustering approach and building out that ecosystem. And it seems like developers do too. There are chains spawning all the time. We're working hard to keep them listed on our Arbitrum ecosystem
Yes.
dashboard as well. So there's a lot coming. And I was just wondering that, you're following these developments closely. It would be great if you could maybe highlight some specific advancements within the ecosystem right now. So what are maybe the most innovative projects right now within the Orbit ecosystem? Or are there any specific chains you'd want to highlight that are doing something that seems to have immense potential?
Yeah, there are so many really interesting chains. So I'll just do a few. I mentioned a few of them already, but just to sum it together, a few that are representative of different sort of kind of parts of innovation. Number one is you have the institutionalized KYC chains like Kinto, for example, that's building an on-chain KYC environment for institutions and investors. You have chains like Rari and Rari Chain that are doing on-chain enforced royalties. You have a super strong cohort of gaming chains like Zai and Treasure and Proof of Play, Apex and Boss. Those are the two chains that they have now, and several others as well that are building, really interesting gaming ecosystems. In many cases, like Proof of Play, fully on-chain games. So not like, hey, a game that also just has this little on-chain component, but actually building fully on-chain games, open ecosystems, open communities that have longevity built in that can't just be shut down overnight. They're really, really exciting things that they're building there as well. Phoenix is a great example to me of how you can like really, really take this stack and push it, and add, in their case, advanced privacy for technology via fully homomorphic encryption directly into the stack and power that as well. I think Rhea is a good example of one that's doing super fast block times. I think they're doing the 100 millisecond block times. I'm for sure missing, so many. That's a danger of trying to list some. But those are some of the core areas and core verticals of chains that we see today. And by the way, the one interesting thing I'll call out is, all the chains I mentioned today are in the Arbitrum ecosystem. But actually, Arbitrum Orbit spans different ecosystems. So just to call it out, there's layer 3s on Arbitrum 1. There are actually layer 2s on Ethereum. And then there's actually layer 3s on other chains as well. So for example, if you look at the base ecosystem, some of their largest or most prominent layer 3s are actually Arbitrum Orbit chains. So to give you two examples, one is Degen chain, one is Blackbird, right? So a slightly older one and a newer one that are both running the Arbitrum Orbit stack. Because it turns out that the Arbitrum Orbit stack, for the reasons that I mentioned, is really the most performant blockchain stack in the execution layer for Ethereum, not just on Arbitrum 1. And actually, the Arbitrum DAO recently voted to expand this to other ecosystems as well. So we recently saw Corn, which is the first Bitcoin, fees collected in Bitcoin or Arbitrum Orbit chain. There's a chain called Duck Chain, which is building on the Telegram Ton network. So there's just like a ton of different people and a ton of different ecosystems using this core technology to do so many different things. And then the other one, which I didn't mention, which is just coming to mind, is also the chains that are doing things interesting in culture and interesting, particularly in the creator and NFT space. I mentioned Rari Chain, but also Ape Chain, which is a really exciting one that's coming live, as well as Azuki is building Anime Chain. So many different chains, from like core degen communities to sort of ones that are more buttoned up for institutions to ones that are doing really cool, advanced technological innovations and everything in between. And that's what I mean by the power of customizability and the power of freedom, that you can take this core technology stack and customize it in any which way you want and build something that's no one else has ever done before.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Within the Ethereum ecosystem, why would you compete when you can build a solution that is kind of value adding to all other parties within the Ethereum ecosystem as well, and to Arbitrum and to everyone developing in that space? So it's just a completely different approach.
Yes, there's so much that you can do, and the basics of the chain is just there for you. You don't have to worry about that, and you can focus on how do I differentiate, how do I build my business logic and my business needs into the stack. And the best thing is, it's yours to do that with, and no one else is telling you, hey, no, you can't do this. You're not allowed to make that change. You need to ask my permission. Your chain, your rules, your freedom to innovate, however, in any which way you want.
Yeah, and this tech stack, which is quite evidently top tier in the space. So Nitro, that is powering everything that you're speaking about here. I would love to hear who is building and contributing to Nitro. So what's the team behind that, and maybe the backgrounds necessary to make all of this innovation happen?
Yeah, so actually it's interesting. So we at Offchain Labs are obviously one of the original, but still a large technical contributor to Arbitrum technology. And Nitro, like Stylus, both started off as a weekend project as an individual on the team that said, "Hey, I think I can do this better." Right. And, let me give me a weekend or a couple of days to sort of figure this out. I think I can do this better. And then, slowly but surely it turns into an entire company priority and a company goal, and then we ship these things. And that's how both of these happen. Today they actually have larger, more staff teams, but really some of the most incredible engineers that I've ever met. But the nice thing is the Arbitrum ecosystem is also expanding. So I mentioned before, like Open Zeppelin building stylus contracts and as well, which is there's something called the Arbitrum Developer Guild, which is this group that we formed to encourage others to take part and incentivize others to take part in building some of the core Arbitrum technology and contributing to the core protocol. So a lot of interesting innovation happening there. We at Offchain Labs are still definitely a core developer and a core contributor, but we're starting to see other teams that are also ramping up and contributing to this technology as well.
So basically the direction for the development of this is a combination of between features pushed by both Arbitrum and like the core team there, but also requested by builders and external contributors who come in to kind of guide the direction.
Yeah, and the other core piece here is the Arbitrum DAO. So, we can build whatever technology we want. We at Offchain Labs, and you can build whatever technology you want. And ultimately, we can make it available for orbit chains, right? Remember, orbit chains can customize. So any orbit chain today can say, hey, I want to launch Stylus, or I don't want to launch Stylus. Like that's their decision, right? They can choose, that's one of the customizations that you can make as an orbit chain together with many, many others. But when it comes to the Arbitrum public chains, that's Arbitrum One and Arbitrum Nova today, and those decisions are actually made by the Arbitrum DAO. So we said, hey, we think Stylus is ready for mainnet. And then a vote actually happened in the Arbitrum DAO where the Arbitrum DAO said, hey, do we want to go and launch this on Arbitrum One? We want to upgrade to Stylus. And we see others building technology and technical proposals as well. For example, there's a proposal out now by the Tally team, which they've have a proposal to change some voting structure in the Arbitrum DAO. So other teams are also engaging, and I don't know how that one's currently being voted on, so I don't know what will happen. But the idea is that teams can create technology and build technology, but ultimately they'll have to go to the DAO and say, hey, do you want this technology that we built? And the DAO can say no, by the way, right? In which case, let's say the DAO would have voted no on Stylus. Would we have wasted all our time? No, because there's still, 60, you tell me, 60 plus public orbit chains, you probably know better than I do, that are building today that now can benefit from Stylus. And of course, it turns out the DAO did adopt Stylus, but the idea is that just like every orbit chain developer has the freedom to make its own decision, in the case of the Arbitrum public chains, it's the Arbitrum DAO that has the freedom to make its own decision. And our team or any other team can go ahead and build technology and ultimately make proposals to the DAO and say, hey, we think it's a good idea to do this. You should vote on this. But ultimately, it's the decision of the community what technology it wants to launch on those chains.
Okay. And then just final question on that front is that as you're enabling essentially complete freedom from a developer's perspective, as this tech stack is being built out, it's like somewhat of a specific question, but are there any specific features or requests you're getting that you already know that will never be implemented in the tech stack? Like some clear restrictions on which direction you don't want to go?
Not that I'm really fully aware of. Basically, the way that it comes to the way that these things happen is we see patterns and themes. So a good example is custom gas token, right? So we have the ability, one team we worked really closely with early on is the Xi team. Before the Arbitrum Orbit program existed, they were like sort of the first team that really helped us understand what teams want. And via working with them and also other teams, we understood, okay, custom gas tokens is a feature that teams want. So then we'll go ahead and we'll build, a launch checkbox or a launch box that allows you to specify this, right? So the idea is we see over time, different data availability solutions is another one. Hey, teams want the ability, the teams want to integrate with Celestia or with EigenDA. And, so we can say, okay, let's try to talk to these teams or work with these teams, or in some cases do it ourselves to actually build that as a sort of a customization option. Now, there are some things that are sort of, kind of more out there. So Phoenix, for example, is building, fully homomorphic encryption into theirs. That's never going to probably, or not anytime soon, going to become like a standard feature in Arbitrum chains. It's sort of more out there. And, it's on a much longer development track. And maybe one day that will be like, together we'll offer that as just a standard option, but it's sort of right now in the realm of something that they're doing that's much more custom for their needs. And, it's on a different path. So today it's more, will this become a standardized customization feature, or it will become a customization feature that's like unique to you and doesn't, have, general applicability at this point? That's where that conversation is happening. But there really aren't any that I'm familiar with, hard lines of, hey, we don't think those features are built. As long as they're, aligned with the core values of the Arbitrum technology, that they don't compromise the integrity and security of the protocol. I think innovation is really, really important. And it's something which we support in different directions. Sometimes it has a general applicability, like, hey, that's a great idea, we should make that available for everyone. Sometimes, well, that's kind of unique, we support you guys, you should do that, you should try that. It's kind of, unique and not something that necessarily applies to everyone. But I think innovation, that's how innovation happens. And today we don't know what, in a year from now, people will want and what that will be. And a lot of these different teams that are trying different ideas today and experimenting, they have a thesis and they have a vision that, hey, this is going to become the future of blockchain technology. The beauty is, I don't know which direction I don't have any better information than anyone else of which direction ultimately, this will take. But the more innovation and the more experimentation of the stack that we have, the more rich the environment will be and the more well prepared we'll be for the future directions that the ecosystem as a whole takes. And that's why I think it's so powerful, not only for the individuals, they're able to have the freedom, but for the stack generally, that there's so much innovation and so many different people contributing and building on top of the stack that ultimately it benefits the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm going to ask you to tap into the grand vision part of your thinking in terms of Arbitrum here. Is, as this ecosystem expands, what does success look like for Arbitrum from your perspective? As condensed of an answer as possible.
It's a great question. So I think success, on two realms. On a technical realm, it's continuing to be the technical, leading technical innovative stack, right? The idea that it is unquestionably today the best technology stack for launching a rollup or layer 2 or layer 3. But as technology evolves, and continuing to be on the cutting edge and continuing to be that stable and mature stack that's also the most powerful stack. That's, I think really important. But also when you look at the ecosystem and the builders, continuing to enable all these different use cases and possibilities and really being integral to blockchain adoption in many different verticals. If you go back a year ago, people would have said, Arbitrum is the DeFi stack, or Arbitrum is a DeFi chain. And some may have said that as an insult. I think that's a great compliment, because the DeFi is such an important application for technology, and Arbitrum is leading significantly in DeFi. But if you fast forward to today, Arbitrum is also the gaming stack, right? There's so much gaming innovation that's happening on Arbitrum. Arbitrum is also, the fintech and the financial institution stack, right? So you have Franklin Templeton building, launching funds at Arbitrum. You have Securitize interacting with the DAO on behalf of BlackRock. You have Robinhood as a close partner of Arbitrum. You have just yesterday, Paxos announced that they're supporting for the first time a layer 2, and they are supporting Arbitrum as that layer 2 for their stablecoin product and also their regulated tokenization platform. So much different innovation in so many different verticals. Another really cool one that went live a week or two ago was Lotte, which is a very large Korean conglomerate that's doing a very interesting and innovative blockchain project called Caliverse. They also chose, hey, we want to build on the Arbitrum stack, and really, really excited about the things that they're doing. So the idea that the Arbitrum stack is the most powerful from a general purpose technology perspective, but also the most powerful to actually power real innovation in so many different verticals, that's what success looks like. And success, I think I like to talk about tech because I'm a technologist at heart, but ultimately it's, what is our technology accomplishing? Whose lives are we changing? What industries are we revolutionizing? That's the ultimate test and goal. And we're seeing so many different industries that we are touching now with this technology. And I think that will only continue to grow over time.
I love that. And of the verticals that you mentioned, we just had Carlos from Securitize on the pod a few weeks back to discuss this thing. And I think Arbitrum is an amazing partner for them to start building these things out. It's incredible work that they're doing in just pushing the institutional adoption of the space.
Yeah, one of the really interesting things, so the Arbitrum DAO recently did this program to basically provide funding for on-chain financial products like money market funds on-chain to invest in these funds. And you saw a lot of, Securitize is one of them, you saw a lot of really well known and also just buttoned up, if you will, financial institutions coming and interacting and engaging with the DAO and saying, hey, how can we be a part of this? We want to be a part of this. And if you just fast forward, not even too long ago, 2 years ago maybe, people would have said, hey, the Arbitrum DAO was an experiment in decentralization. No other DAO, particularly a layer 2 DAO, is as decentralized as the Arbitrum DAO. Gives the DAO real power over the technology, real power over the treasury. And people would have said, this is a terrible idea because no real company, if you will, is going to want to talk to a DAO. And, at the time, that was a legitimate criticism because it had never been done before. But if you fast forward to today, you see, quote unquote, real companies, if you will. Not that the DAO is not a real company, but, to use the sort of idiom, a real company going ahead and saying, going onto the DAO forum and saying, how do we become a part of this? We want to work with you. We want to talk to you. And that is such a large step forward for Arbitrum, but also for DAOs and industry that you're seeing these interactions, and you're seeing that DAOs don't have to be limited. DAOs can be extremely powerful entities too, and they can do business with, the most established institutions in the world. That is, a massive validation of everything that we're doing here, and a massive validation that follow, the philosophies, follow those values. Don't hold back decentralization because you think that someone won't want to work with you, won't want to do business. Push forward on decentralization, and you'll see that the institutions will value that and appreciate that and want to become part of it.
Yeah, definitely. And you also named Robinhood there. I want to tag on to that because I know it interests a lot of people, especially after listening to Vlad's recent kind of media round where they spoke very bullishly about crypto and what they plan to do. The word tokenization was dropped several times. And I know that they have a partnership in place with Arbitrum. There's been lots of media around that, people say, but it feels like a very initial type of trial period partnership, setting up swaps inside the wallet, etc., and kind of testing the waters. I would love to hear your perspective on how you see this collaboration potentially evolving, and maybe even from a bit of a speculative standpoint of, in an ideal world, how would you like to see it evolve as you bring these players into the space?
Yeah, I think everyone is, backing up for a second, just talking generally, when we work with a traditional institution, whether it's a fintech institution or, a larger financial institution or any real large enterprise, like there's always going to be like a series of hurdles and things that need to go in place. And often these things happen in stages, right? So, stage one is, okay, we can do something in crypto. And then often there's a vision and a goal and the things, that need to change. Sometimes it's regulatory clarity, say for a fund on chain. Sometimes it's, stakeholders, sometimes just wanting to see that there's success in the product. So I think this is just generally not specific to a partnership. There's often a phased approach to many of these larger partnerships, and particularly with more established institutions. Speaking of Robinhood specifically, though, the thing that excites me the most is, Robinhood has an incredible user base, and, one that I think is very, very aligned with many of the core values of crypto, right? So people that are, many case traders, individuals that are interested in trading, and there's just a very, very strong synergy there. And the distribution that Robinhood has, for some of the, for crypto protocols and crypto DeFi and different DeFi integrations that they may make over time, I think is going to be very, very powerful. As I said before, like we can build all of the, all of the different technology we want, build the best technology, but the real test is, who's adopting it, how many people are integrating it, are you changing, the course of business or even the course of lives with this technology. I think Robinhood has a fantastic distribution platform, and one that, we as an industry and also Arbitrum as a community can really develop from. Arbitrum has the best blockchain technology. Arbitrum has the best DeFi community, particularly when it comes to DeFi innovation. And when you connect that with Robinhood's user base, I think that there can be, real fireworks that come. So today you can go ahead in the Robinhood crypto app and trade any Arbitrum token. That's already a very, very big unlock. I don't want to speak for their team or for their plans, but I think that there's definitely a lot deeper integrations that could happen over time. And I'm excited to see how this partnership continues to develop. But so far, very, very excited to have the opportunity to work with them. It was a big announcement last year at ETH Denver, and it's been really extremely successful since.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that. I'm going to have Johan Kerbrat from their Crypto GM on the pod, hopefully in a couple of weeks' time. So I'm going to try to dig deeper into their perspective as well and how they're approaching that. Because I know people have a lot of questions. It's exciting. You just feel like they're going to do something big in the space. What's going to happen?
Absolutely. And Johan is a really fantastic visionary who knows the space so well and really an incredible partner to work with. And we're so excited that Arbitrum Technology has the opportunity to really partner with them because, again, having the best DeFi ecosystem and the best DeFi technology and the strongest and most secure platform together with Robinhood's user base and distribution and all the innovation they're doing, I think, is a very, very powerful combination. And I'm excited to see where it goes and we'll continue to work with them.
So let's go one level deeper here. There's tech top tier. There's a lot of traction, lots of chains being built. User activity is also in a very good position. Network effects are going on. Adoption is happening. New use cases are coming in. From an investor's point of view, what you next want to understand is kind of the value accrual. So what's the business model here as your ecosystem starts expanding? Starting off, I'd love for you to just basically explain Arbitrum's business model today, and then how it expands to the Orbit ecosystem and how that plays into value accrual for Arbitrum.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Arbitrum DAO collects fees for the core chains. So Arbitrum One and Arbitrum Nova, charge fees to users. The fees are very, very low, and users enjoy the low fees. But of course, in volume and aggregate, there are fees that collect. And last year it was tens of millions of dollars in fees that went to the Arbitrum DAO for these chains. And that's like sort of the core business model for Arbitrum One and Arbitrum Nova when it comes to the DAO. When it comes to, Arbitrum, by the way, actually to step back for 1 second, there's this misnomer in the community people like to call sequencer revenue. People say, okay, like the revenue goes to the sequencer. So that's not the case, really. It's actually a misnomer. And in the case of Arbitrum, the revenue goes to the DAO treasury. So all the fees in Arbitrum go to the DAO treasury, and the sequencer will be decentralized over time, but all at the will of the DAO and the DAO treasury. And ultimately, it's not like the sequencer is collecting the revenue; it's actually the DAO treasury. An analogy I like to give is: imagine you go to a theater, and there is someone that's collecting money for the tickets, and you're like, "Wow, I wish I had, I could take that job for a day because I would get all that money." And the answer is, that's a fantastic job, but they're not like collecting the money for themselves. They're going ahead and it's going into the theater, and they're getting a salary, for their role. And it's something very similar, I think, when it comes to sequencer revenue versus chain revenue. The sequencer is the one that collects it, but ultimately the revenue belongs to and goes to the chain, and that's how we view things in the Arbitrum ecosystem. So that's, I think, an important point to make. And another one is, when it comes to the sequencer revenue, there's currently the Arbitrum sequencer is first come, first serve, which means the transaction ordering that it processes is as they come. But over time, we have a proposal that we put out from the Offchain Labs research team called Time Boost. And Time Boost actually changes this property. So there are basically two schools of thought today prior to Time Boost. There are those that say, hey, do something like first come, first serve, because then users get the best, that's what your user wants. Your user wants to know that they get their transaction on chain quickly, they're not being front run, and that's what they want to know. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have people that say, no, do something called like MEV auction, or auction off the rights to ordering. And whoever pays the most gets to have priority placement. And that's good for like MEV searchers or people who are trying to arbitrage or, collect on-chain opportunities, but it's sometimes bad for users because your user just playing their game may not be able to compete with the priority fees of someone chasing, a large opportunity on chain, and they're going to get, unnecessarily delayed, often for long periods of time. And that's sort of the tension you have between these two users or these two types of sequencing. What Time Boost does is it combines the best of all of them. Number one is, just like Arbitrum today, it preserves the fact that there's no front running. So you can't be front run. Your transaction remains private until it's published. So I can't see your transaction and try to get in front of it. The only time I first see your transaction, there's no public mempool. The first time I see your transaction is when it's published on chain. But it also says your average user doesn't get first come, first serve, but they get guaranteed fast inclusion. So they'll have at most, say, 200 milliseconds of delay added. So very fast inclusion, not necessarily first come, first serve, but very fast inclusion. And what do I mean by not necessarily first come, first serve? Because there's something else called the priority lane, where you can actually now, the MEV searchers or those that want to compete for the opportunities can buy a ticket for the priority lane for a particular, couple of blocks that they now get, say, minute or so, they now get their transactions put in first. And it kind of, it gets you the best of all. So number one is it makes the MEV community happy because they have a priority lane. The user is still happy because A, they're not being front run, and B, they have guaranteed fast inclusion. So they don't necessarily care that someone or other transaction might get included first. What they care is that, okay, my transaction will be included really quickly and I'll be able to continue on knowing that I don't have to wait unnecessarily long periods of time. That's what Time Boost does. But Time Boost also, the nice thing is it internalizes that MEV revenue for the DAO. So if someone today wants to sort of, on Ethereum or some other chain, or Arbitrum or some other chain wants to sort of, get their transaction faster, they're going to maybe pay a lot of money to external providers like AWS. But today, they'll actually have the ability to pay that to the chain. So the chain will internalize some of that revenue as well. So that's, that's Arbitrum 1 and Nova as it is today, and as, it will be with Time Boost. And by the way, Time Boost, the design was chosen so that it can be decentralized. And the Offchain Labs research team, we are collaborating together with Espresso and actually building together a decentralized version of Time Boost. So you can actually have that as well. You asked also about Arbitrum Orbit, and Arbitrum Orbit, the answer is it really depends where you build your Orbit chain. Remember I said before, you can build an L2 on Arbitrum 1, you can build an L3 on Arbitrum 1, you can build an L2, you can build an L3, you can build on Bitcoin or on other blockchains. So the answer is, if you're building a layer 3 on Arbitrum 1, it's free, completely free to use and customize as you will. If you're building in a layer 2 or a layer 3 on another network, you're asked to pay a 10% of your on-chain profits. That means you take your on-chain fees, subtract your on-chain costs, your data availability costs, your settlement costs, and now you pay 10% of what's left to the Arbitrum DAO, and actually 8% to the Arbitrum DAO, 2% to the Arbitrum Developer Guild. That's the structure I mentioned before that incentivize others to participate. So now there's funds available for others to go ahead and participate in the core development and fund that core development. And this model actually, I think, makes a lot of sense. I'll tell you why. Historically, there's been two types of software. There's been open source software and closed source software. And open source software is fantastic because everyone's able to use it. And closed source software, not that good, because it's good for companies that own it, but for the larger community, you don't have the access to use it. The problem with open source software is the shortfalling that we've seen over time with open source software is often there are like hacks or attacks that happen in, say, some really popular cryptographic library like OpenSSL or something, and you just scratch your head for a second. You say, I don't understand this. This is powering like billions of dollars of the internet. Who's developing this? It's like, I don't know. It's whatever the case may be for the library. There's two developers that do it part time. And you say, if only there was like a better funding model, and you kind of get to this tragedy of commons where there's this thing that everyone uses, but no one's actually funding its development. And for certain libraries, you've gotten better over time in fixing that. But it's a general problem that sometimes happens, that sometimes the most popular libraries are actually not very well funded. And that's why, what we believe in Arbitrum, we believe in Offchain Labs for Arbitrum technology is a third model, which is actually enabled uniquely by blockchain technology, enabled uniquely by the fact that you have financialized communities, and we call that community sourced. So it's open in the sense that anyone can use it. You don't need prior permission. You don't need anything else. You can use it, you can customize, you can change it. You don't have to ask anyone, but you are explicitly required to contribute back to the community, because it's not just an open source, library that exists at GitHub now. There's a DAO and a developer guild and a community that you can actually has a wallet and you can actually contribute back to. And there are different ways that you contribute to that community. So if you build a layer 3 on Arbitrum 1, you don't need to contribute explicitly. Just the fact that you're on there sending your fees through the chain, using it as your data availability layer, will contribute to the DAO's revenue, and that's enough. So there's no implicit fees. But if you're building, say, a layer 2 on Ethereum, or you're building a layer 3 on another chain that the Arbitrum DAO is not involved with, then you're asked, okay, can you contribute back some of those resources to continue the funding of this technology, to continue the funding on the chain? And I think that's it wasn't possible before, because there wasn't, if you take like OpenSSL, there's no like natural financialized community that exists around it. Someone could set up a foundation and a wallet, but here, like in the very technology, there is fee collection built in. There is an entity that, is decentralized and can unite and has a treasury, a joint wallet. So you can actually go ahead and build what we call community source licensing, which is fully open to use. But the only requirement is, hey, become part of this community, contribute back to this community, and fund the development of this software.
Yeah, love that. Thanks for the comprehensive answer there, breaking down the business model and the ideology behind it as well, because I think that's important to understand of what the direction is that you want to take this and why you're making these decisions. Now, this has been a super insightful hour. Thank you, Steven. What I wanted was to add a lot of qualitative context to the quantitative data that we showcase of the growing Orbit ecosystem. So I think we got a lot of qualitative context here. Now the Stylus is live, everything is growing. Final question is just that, what is the next biggest milestone that people should be looking out for in the Arbitrum ecosystem?
Yeah. So on short-term horizons, there's Time Boost, which is coming up that we mentioned. I think will be voted on the DAO relatively soon, probably in the next couple of weeks. So again, it's something that's available for different orbit chains to do and will potentially be adopted by the DAO subject to its vote. Another really exciting and big one that's coming up is Arbitrum Bold, which is a brand new fraud-proving protocol, challenge protocol for the optimistic rollup. And part of that, a lot of goodies will come in that. Part of that is validation will be open up for everyone. So Arbitrum will be even more significantly decentralized. Another one on the technology part that I mentioned before is decentralized sequencing. So there's ongoing collaboration between Offchain Labs and Espresso to build a decentralized version of Time Boost and propose that to the Arbitrum chains. I think that's going to be something that a lot of people are really excited about and want, and it's probably a lot closer to being ready for consideration than a lot of people think. So that's something. Those are sort of on the technologies from the technology standpoint. From the ecosystem and adoption standpoint, I think we're at a critical point today where there is no large institution out there. There's not someone or even some team that's thinking deeply about how does the blockchain affect us? How can we contribute? How can we benefit our users from being part of the blockchain? And this conversation has gotten a lot more nuanced over time. So, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, this conversation didn't exist. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it was, you had a lot of institutions saying, okay, let's build our own blockchain. Let's take Hyperledger or R3 or something and build our own blockchain, but kind of divorced from the public blockchains, not connected to Ethereum, not connected to Bitcoin or any other network. They just like their own chain today. But today we have a ton of really, really interested institutions that are appreciating the value of Ethereum, appreciating the value of actually connecting to the public blockchain, and Ethereum being the most expressive public blockchain that can actually do really interesting things for their business needs, being the definitely the lead choice for many. And they're appreciating that, hey, us running our own database and calling it a blockchain is actually less interesting than us connecting to Ethereum. And there's often a lot of hurdles to get there, but they're actively engaging on those hurdles. And we're seeing so much adoption. Like I said, Arbitrum was once called the DeFi chain, but today you can equivalently call it the gaming chain, and it's equivalently being massively adopted by different institutions, financial institutions, and fintechs as well, and having really so much impact in different verticals. And that's the thing which I'm really excited about, because again, we're going to see Arbitrum Stylus, bring more developers on, enable institutions, but ultimately, we create the hooks, we create the tools for people to build things. But the real magic happens when people take those tools and actually build incredible, new, differentiated experiences. And when you say something like, wow, whether it's in payments or whether it's in gaming or whether it's in some other vertical that I haven't even imagined yet, look at this. This is a brand new thing that could not exist without the blockchain technology, that could not exist without Ethereum, that could not exist without Arbitrum. And those are the applications I'm so excited about. And we're at a critical point today where those conversations are happening deeply. Some of them are spilling over. Some of those are actually happening now in public, but a lot more is happening in private. And again, I really believe that there's no large institution today that's not deeply considering how they can make an impact on the blockchain. And what better time would there be to be part of this incredible community than now? And I think the next couple of years is going to absolutely be massive. And we're going to see so much innovation, both on the core technology, but also on the application layer.
Love that, and completely agree with you. Really appreciate your time today, Steven. I appreciate all the insights here. It's been super valuable for everyone, I'm sure of that. And we definitely need to do this again at some point, because there's so many topics that we can dive deep into as this ecosystem keeps expanding. So hope we get a chance to do that at some point.
Love to, yes, and thank you for having me.
Of course.